Chapter 2, 70 Crown Street. Jack and May married on Boxing Day 1931 at St. Benedict's Catholic Church on Broadway in Sydney. Why Sydney, you may be given to wonder? The reason was simple. From the church, it was something of a short walk or dash to Central Station to catch the train. Honeymoons, holidays and weekends away were all the rage, and the alpine climbs of Leura, Katoomba, and Medlow Bath were the favoured destinations. But depression time it was. So, the cash-strapped couple took the Sydney option. It also saved them a day. A day that could be better spent, well, just better spent. Not only that, but they could also be back at work by Monday. Another important consideration. In the new year they would set up shop at 70 Crown Street, Wollongong. Jack's repair business took up the shop front. Behind were the living room and kitchen. Upstairs 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Typical for the time, the residence also came with a small fenced backyard and rear lane access. Just big enough to dry the laundry and air the kids. It was the type of building found in all cities and towns across the country. Many a small business found a long-term home in such a building. They were a place for the owner, or the proprietor to set up shop and raise a family. Crown Street was the main street of Wollongong in those days. It ran from West Wollongong, down the hill almost to the beach. It was a thoroughfare. As such, it was the commercial hub of the city and the district. And number 70 was ideally situated to capture the passing trade, just up from the corner of Crown and Corrimal Streets. It was 1932, and repairing shoes was a good business, at a time when people usually owned no more than 2 or 3 pairs of shoes or boots. Shoes were to be cared for and maintained as long as the wearer could manage. They were a major investment for men and women alike. Not to mention the school trade for growing children. Once established, Jack Ryan's shoe repair business began to do well. His reputation for quality work and cheerful service soon spread. Jack and May, as Mum preferred, celebrated their first year of marriage in November with the arrival of my eldest sister Joy. She wasn't alone for long either. My brothers Bill and Kevin soon arrived. Bill in 1934 and Kevin in 1937. 1939 was, as we know, the year when the world went to war again. It brought my father and mother an early dose of what the country was in for. As I said before, back then, people hung on to their shoes. You polished them, cared for them. Shoes were an investment and having a good local shoe repairer was essential. As a result, Jack had enjoyed a steady flow of business for a number of years. But he was in every sense of the word, a sole trader. As long as Jack was in the shop the work got done. But then in February of '39, one little mishap changed everything. When cutting out a template, Jack lost control of the blade and cut his left arm just above the wrist. It could have been a lot worse, but the blade severed the tendons just above his left hand. A lot of blood was lost, but the hand was saved. Nonetheless, the damage was done. Jack lost most of his customary dexterity in his fingers, and being left-handed it meant having to relearn many of his skills with his right hand. A year later it would keep him out of the army. However, the immediate effect was the shop having to close and the family's income drying up. People were still needing Dad's workmanship. May and Jack were in agreement. Get an apprentice or lose the business. So, Jack hired an apprentice, and after a time the shop became a business again, with Jack as the proprietor and manager. Home front. The fallout of the injury would plague him from time to time. Already working long hours to afford his family and pay his apprentice, Jack received his call-up papers when Japan entered the war. But the army said no. His injury and lack of dexterity meant as a soldier he only had one good hand. It was the cause of embarrassment and hurt for him for the rest of the war and beyond. People with a malicious streak implied that the shoemaker's injury was self-inflicted. That hurt became more than the wound itself, as my father, though small in stature, was a very fit and agile man. And he had seen what war could do firsthand to people back in his youth at Gunnedah. Nevertheless, the shame he felt was an extension of his small man syndrome. He would endure the slights on his character, but it was the teasing and the insults that his children endured that grieved him the most. Particularly after the war, when many of the familiar faces round the neighborhood failed to return. One silver lining was that he gained an army contract to repair and restore the soldiers' boots and shoes. It allowed him to get back on his feet again, if you'll pardon the expression. It was most timely, as a third brother, Peter, arrived in February of 1940. The war years and beyond would be the toughest the young country would ever encounter. The whole country had to be organized on a war footing. All power was centralized in Canberra, where politics was put aside and a war cabinet put in charge. From 1941 to 1948, Jack and May would bring another 4 children into the world. This too would be lampooned by others. Those on the lookout for an opportunity to ridicule the Catholic faith and propagate the age-old stereotypes of the working-class Catholic. By 1941, Jack and May had a family, a business, and an apprentice to support. Hard work was in their DNA, as it was for all the generations of the day. Shirking your responsibilities didn't ever enter into the discussion. With a depression and now a war, people were left in no doubt that it was all hands to the wheel, whether it be the home or the home front. By the time the Japanese caught the world out at Pearl Harbor, the Ryan family at 70 Crown Street had 2 children at school, Joy and Bill, and 3 at home, Kevin and Peter. Veronica had arrived in January of 41 to bring the brood to 5. Keep in mind where they lived. The premises only contained 2 bedrooms. A full house? You can only imagine. By the time brother John arrived in 1942, Kevin was off at school. The boys were sent to the Christian Brothers School at the top of Crown Street. Joy went to the nearby St. Mary's Primary School. The tenuous finances of the couple would be forever put in jeopardy whenever school fees were due. More about that later. But they managed, as they always did, scrimping and saving for the next rainy day. But in that, they were not alone. Food during those years was the other big headache. Rationing was well entrenched by 42. But while it was designed to feed a family, it became stretched for a family that continued to grow. The church's attitude to birth control was enforced from the pulpit and visiting clergy alike. Not that it was likely to change anything for families, already coping with the loss of income and the loss of family members in the battlefields around the world. Then there was the relocation of men and women to the many bases, depots, and hospitals around the country. And let's not forget the Land Army. Families had never been under so much pressure, day in day out, as they were then. But the fact that my mother and father rarely questioned the church and its edicts would be an issue for all my brothers and sisters. It would come back to haunt our family time and again, particularly in the 1950s and 1960s. But it's well to remember, in those far-off days, that the sway and control of both the Catholic and Protestant churches was ironclad. Right down to who you voted for. My father and mother served in an army of sorts. A less tangible but no less visible army that carried on in the front line of daily life. Whether in the outback or country, towns or cities, families battled every day against fear, endured the never-ending censorship and tactless rumors. All families with a serving member dreaded the knock on the door, the telegram or official letter. And for some, the bigotry and prejudices of both neighbors and strangers. The Ryan family was just one of the countless families who endured this war, with its losses and deprivations. Tough times can divide or unite a people. Sad to say, in Wollongong, as across the nation, it did both. But sometimes with a dash or two of humor and a sprinkling of irony. The 23rd of February 1943 is not a date that leaps into view. But in Wollongong, or rather Port Kembla, leapt into view is what it did. In the form of a Japanese reconnaissance plane swooping over the steelworks. It was unusual to say the least to hear aircraft overhead in the course of an average day. There was always some scuttlebug about aircraft taking off or landing at the recently built airstrip at Albion Park. And there was a naval base at Jarvis Bay, further down the coast. So not entirely unusual. But the low level and the deep drone of the engines alerted everyone in the district almost immediately. When the sirens started up, the good and somewhat startled citizens of Port Kembla and Wollongong scrambled into action. Well, not all of them. At 70 Crown Street, in the upper bedroom window, eager young faces hung out of the window straining to get a glimpse of the intruder. Within minutes came a pounding on the front door of the shop. A highly irate, highly agitated order was delivered to Mum and Dad by a highly irate, highly agitated air warden. The window was duly closed, the blinds drawn, and the Japanese plane continued on its way. Those of us who have enjoyed the TV series of Dad's Army will be well acquainted with the role and attitude of those pressed into service as air wardens. What follows is about 60% true. Teddy Dion was a well-known identity in Wollongong for many years. In a good way. He owned the community bus service and as such daily drove a number of the bus routes. He was a well-known face to most Wollongonians. Well, not all, as it turned out. You see, Teddy was Chinese by birth and not surprisingly, by appearance. He was appointed as an air warden for a number of reasons. Experience, knowledge of the roads and suburbs. And of course, a well-known face around the district. A number of air raid drills had prepared the people of the Illawarra as to what to expect and what to do. All in the early years of the war. So, on the night in question, when the sirens went off, people immediately began to extinguish their lights, draw their blinds and wait inside their house or building. Teddy spotted a house which had failed to comply. Lights were on and a window open. He immediately knocked on the door to alert the residents. An elderly woman answered the door in a state of high anxiety, only to be confronted by an Asian man in a military helmet. She screamed with the shock and promptly fainted. When revived, she explained that in her panic she thought the Japanese had landed. As you can imagine, word soon got out. And many a gathering was enlivened by the retelling of the tale. As one war ends. August 1945. Finally, the war was over. But its effects would be felt and dealt with for years. Many would say, we are still feeling its effects today. 2 more brothers were born into the Ryan family either side of 1945. Patrick in 1944 and Mark in 1946. That brought the tally to 8. More mouths to feed, more bodies to clothe, more minds to school. Then at the year's end Jack's contract with the army expired. The time had come. He had to find enough work to pay the way of the family. The family had, like all Australian families, benefited from the introduction of the Child Endowment Program in 1941. It was part of the populate or perish policy. 5 shillings per child per week, up to the age of 16, was paid to the mother. In a family of now 8, it certainly helped. But in reality, it was robbing Peter to pay Paul. Or Patrick or Mark. How those 2 ever managed their way through those years, I may never know. It's been through my brothers and sisters that I even know what I do. Even they could never know the full story. As Mark, my nearest brother, once said to me, only if we walked in their shoes could we ever know. With the army contract gone, my dad had to ensure that the income was not just replaced but increased. A new home was needed, one that could accommodate the whole family. As they always did, Dad and Mum ran through their options. Talked it over with friends and family and came to a decision. The business had to go. So in 1951, after 19 years, Dad sold the business. He then managed to secure work at a local BHP coke mill. Steel was needed for the post-war boom, as were shoes. He signed up for the early shift at the coke ovens. This allowed him time to come home, shower and change, and go off for another 3 to 4 hours mending shoes at a local shoe repair shop. It was a routine the man would follow for 5.5 days a week for the next 12 years. Family snapshots. My sister Joy Elizabeth and brother Bill. My oldest sister, Joy, began her nursing training the year I was born, in 1949. So, I don't have many memories of her as a young child. What I do remember are the times Joy would come home, after long shifts at Wollongong Hospital, where she resided in the nurses' quarters. As I grew older, I came to call her Joy by name and a true joy by nature. To our family, she was Joydy. Forever sweet and always lovely. She had a special way of being kind to her little brother, often showing up with a gift or a treat for me. I have vivid memories of waiting eagerly by the front gate for her to come home on her extended days off, usually once a month. From the gate, I could look up the street and see her walking down from the bus stop at the main thoroughfare. The moment I spotted her, I'd call to my mother, asking if I could go and meet her. I'd be practically bursting with excitement. Mum would call back, reminding me not to run, worried I might tire myself out because of my heart condition. But that never stopped me. As soon as I reached her, she would bend down and scoop me up, and I would feel like the luckiest little brother in the world. In 1956, she married John Warden. Joy has always had a soft, gentle and very lovable sweetness about her. She studied hard, achieving high qualifications in medical studies and nursing, qualifying her to supervisory level. I now imagine her being a nurse in the Florence Nightingale mode. Strict, but caring. It is a fact of life that the youngest and the oldest in large families are often cast in the role of relatives. Not in affection, but just in the time and tide of things. My memories of Joy back then are sparse. It would be only much later in life that we would get to know each other better. My eldest brother Bill, or Will as he was sometimes known, was a case in point. Bill was 19 in 1955 and away at Wagga in southern New South Wales training as a teacher. A teacher in the public, not Catholic schools system. That told you a lot about Bill politically and spiritually. Bill taught in a little hamlet near Canberra called Harold's Cross. It was timber country, cold in winter and dry and hot in summer. It was a one-teacher school and Bill boarded with a local family. Then he surprised us all by taking up a teaching post in London's East End in 1958. Wow! That was some change when we all found out about it. No one on either side of our family had ever done any travel outside Australia, except in war times. But it was a tough initiation to overseas teaching, and Bill soon moved on to Scotland, where he taught for another year before moving to Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, in Africa. Bill married a lovely woman, Trish, who was part of a plantation family in 1963. They also married outside the Catholic Church. The effect on my father was massive. The shock waves would remain for some time. Bill returned home in the same year to take a teaching post in remote southwestern New South Wales at a small town called Wollongong. It was a tough ask for a woman from a privileged background. Tough too for a young, just married teacher. Within a few years, Bill resigned his post and moved to Wagga Wagga, where he became a lecturer at the Teachers College. Sadly, Bill is no longer with us. Sadder too, he died before my mother, and she grieved for him so. But she stayed close to Trish and the children until her own passing.